So I'm going to take a few moments here to ask some questions and to follow up on the question that Vice Chairman Barrasso started with on the unspent housing block grant funds. You know, we've had some recommendations to the committee to look at what other agencies have done, something like if HUD was unable to meet a deadline for that request, that after that deadline it would be deemed approved. Is that something that you think would be helpful in this situation?
Yes, Senator. I think deadlines would be very helpful. As a matter of fact, in 2012, the appropriation committees set a timeline on 2012 funds. I think they set out a timeline of 10 years, so it's 5 years to obligate and 10 years to expend. And that, I think could be very effective. I also know under ARA, there was a strict timeline in spending ARA funds, and the tribe, and I think we received something like $510 million under ARA. Half of that went out on a competitive basis, and those tribes that received those funds, many of them, I think there was maybe a 3-year time frame there, but many of them finished up their projects in 2 years. And I think the time aspect of it played a very, very important role. The total expenditure rate on that was, like 99.9%. But I am almost positive that time had a big effect on that.
Anybody else want to add comment on that?
It could actually go both ways, and I believe that is within the NAHASDA draft language that we have language in there deemed approved through HUD should they not meet any of their deadlines in a timely manner.
Okay. What about the low-income housing tax credit? Obviously, this has been a successful program across the board, and obviously it's something that has been used in a few instances in coordination with other housing programs. Are we running into problems with the low-income housing tax credit being used more aggressively in Indian country? Because it's been a very, very successful program from many, many different aspects on non-tribal land, and not only the benefit of getting the new units, but also stimulating the economy. And the fact that the federal government is putting out a little bit of capital but leveraging much more private sector capital is for very, very needed housing units. So I'm just curious as to why this isn't being used more in Indian country.
Chairwoman Cantwell, we looked into that at the Puyallup Tribal Housing Authority, and we found that it was prohibitive in several ways for us. Tax credits really need a lot of units, so we need to have land, we need to have ownership of that land, and for us it didn't pencil out. But I think developing capacity among the tribes, once we developed capacity and learned about Title VI and what it took for us as a tribe to get a Title VI loan, meaning clean audits and just having our books clean and knowing what the banks would want us to do to finance us, then we began that process. So it was a matter of educating ourselves about the Title VI program and partnering with HUD, and we were able to utilize that program. Tax credits are complicated, and for us, we looked at it for our 10-unit development, but it just didn't pencil out. We're not able to charge rents to sustain what we guarantee we have to charge in rents. So back to the 30% rule, 30% of zero is zero. And if we can't charge anything and we're serving the lowest of the low income, you put them in a tax credit unit, we're required to pay a certain amount. We're obligated to pay that. So there are some barriers, but I'm certainly interested in it. I think it's a great program.
Mr. Boyd?
I agree. I think one of the challenges early on has been capacity, building that capacity within the designated housing entities. But that over the past 10 years, as long as I've been in this position, it has really exploded, I think, in Indian country. But, also they have to.
What has exploded?
The ability and the number of tax credits that tribes have applied for and have received. I recall, and I was in a meeting one day and we were talking to some of the folks from the Blackfeet Reservation, and they have excelled so well in doing tax credits, it just became a part of their business. And they were taking that knowledge and that experience and sharing it with other tribes. I know up in Alaska, the Cook Inlet Housing Authority had the capacity and ability to do it, so they went over to Bethel, to another regional housing authority, and lent that and partnered with them basically to obtain tax credits from the state of Alaska. And of course, one of the challenges, of course, is the competition that the tribes have to work within that state. I think there was a comment maybe, is it possible maybe to get a set aside of some sort?
Because there's a problem with the states?
Yeah, and some, it's
I mean,
an
there's a
interesting
problem with states
relationship.
saying they don't want to do low-income housing if it's on a reservation?
Well, at least from what I've understood, there are some states that work really well with tribes on financing, and there are some states that aren't as aggressive, perhaps. But tribes have learned how to work with that in that capacity building, and I think that knowledge is extremely important.
Well, I'm just responding to my fellow colleagues on this committee who are talking about the incredible need that still exists.
Right.
And it may be one thing, Ms. Bryan, if you're saying that not everybody has the volume of units that would benefit or pencil out from a low-income housing tax credit. But at the same time, there seems to be a very large-scale need on some of these larger reservations, and this would be something that could be beneficial and tied into these other programs. And so
Well, totally.
so we need to identify what the real issue is here.
But I like to agree with Roger. In our state, tribes have a very hard time competing for those funds. They're very competitive, and housing authorities who are much more advanced in grant writing and working with the state for 20 years before the tribes showed up trying to get a grant, have their position to get the tax credits, and they're lined up for it with their projects. So I think capacity.
I mean, there's just a knowledge base within various communities about how to use the program where there isn't with Indian country yet.
That, and combined with the competitiveness, and tribes don't get any special, competitive edge. We're treated as a local government within the state when we apply for those tax credits.
But that's the way it is for all local governments.
For all of them,
So,
yeah.
and it's been a very successful program across the board. Anyway, we'll have to drill down more on this. Mr. Sussman, you said you were talking about the 184 program and your use of it and its success, particularly in your state, but you also mentioned Alaska. So do you have recommendations on how we would better utilize that on trust lands?
Well, I think one of the big barriers to utilizing it on trust land has been addressed through the Hearth Act, and that now that creates an opportunity for tribes to develop their own laws and regulations, that this rule of law is needed by private investors to mitigate the risk that they would face in dealing on trust land. So as far as giving the tribes the control to issue the leases, the long-term leases that they have, that plus other laws to regulate the industry and give these private investors that assurance they need to invest their money. So I think we're really have an opportunity to even expand on the success that program has already enjoyed, and more so on the trust land.
How many units has the Choctaw Financial Corporation done, or your finance program? How many homes have you helped finance?
We finance approximately, we do about 100 loans a year. Of that, about 25 a year are direct first mortgages. So over the years, we've done probably 400 or 500 units I know we have a portfolio that consists of over 600 units just within our area. And we've leveraged about twice that many outside of our area, and that's over the last 15-year period.
So is there anything else that we should be thinking about, this issue of streamlining and pooling resources to leverage the housing grant funds?
Yeah, I think back to Vice Chairman Brasso's question earlier, is if we could streamline the reporting requirements and the other federal requirements that we see. Also, Ms. Heiderkamp, she mentioned that we want to partner more with all of our local and state entities. And in this environment that we work in, we can't work alone anymore. We've got to partner, and we've got to leverage among the tribes, the other agencies, because part of the key is in solving the affordable housing issue is going to be a long-term solution, which means investments in education and career development to raise the incomes of our folks. That's how they're going to afford homes over the long term. So we have to look at even those other agencies within our own tribe as a partnership, and it's something that we're trying to break this poverty cycle over the generations.
Mr. Ironclad, you mentioned you're doing your own tribal assessment on need. Why is that?
Why am I doing that?
No, I get why you're doing it, and I'm asking, why did you have to do it? Isn't there data that's out there that's reliable?
Well, the data that we have ain't up to power. Now we're doing something that's actually going to show what's all there. And I feel it's and I just wanted to comment on the tax credits a little bit, if I can.
Yes.
We may do a first tax credit program at Pine Ridge. The reason why we never did it, our people, well, first of all, there's unemployment's 80% unemployed. And how are they going to pay for their unit? And if they default, then the housing has to pay that. And that would bankrupt our housing authority. But right now, we're taking a chance of building 32 units of veteran home, the homeless, and about 3 different other areas that we're trying to do. But I'm a little leery about paying this loan back over 15 years. And there's a lot of things that you have to look at. I talked to a lot of guys, and they kind of recommended I didn't do it, but we need homes. We need to do something. So.
Well, I definitely want to make sure, Mr. Boyd, am I missing something here? Why we don't have just an accurate assessment across Indian country of what the need really is? Is there somebody that's collecting that data on the exact need?
Well, currently, the Policy Development and Research Office within HUD and our program are collaborating and doing a housing needs assessment, and that whole process is taking place right now because the last housing needs assessment that was completed was in 1996. One of the problems that they had with that assessment is the return rate on surveys that they did was quite low. So this go around, one of the elements in which that they are employing is to work very closely with those tribes that will be surveyed to make sure that we get a much better return rate on the surveys. And I understand that maybe, and I guess what they're shooting for is 2014 to have that completed. So I think there is a process, and we will be receiving some information between now and it finishes, but we're hoping that that's really going to update that need throughout Indian country.
And what did people think about looking backwards now at the 96 assessment? Was that a successful assessment, or?
I don't think people really felt like it was a success, mainly because of the return rate on the surveys that they were doing.
Well, I think this is something we're going to have to deal with along with the various issues that you brought up today.
Yes.
But if we're going to match success of federal programs to address the need, we're going to have an accurate assessment of the need. And I think my colleagues, Mr. Ironclad, they spoke from the heart about this issue. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, as Senator Franken mentioned, as Senator Heitkamp mentioned, they're trying to deal with it on the ground and their frustration. And I mentioned to my own staff that, you know, you can look at this, these various programs from a programmatic level, and then you can visit Indian country. And they don't match up. On the one hand, you see programs that look like they can be taken advantage of, and then you go to Indian country and you see poverty and people living in the conditions that were being described here. So somewhere we got to do a better job of connecting this, the needs in the programs. We have to do the streamlining. We have to make them efficient. But we also have to take advantage of these programs that are out there, like the low-income housing tax credit that's being successfully used by big cities, small cities, you know, very diverse communities all across the nation, and figure out ways to better leverage the private sector investment as well. And if that is a barrier, private sector investment on this as it relates to Indian country, then we should have a hearing on that and discuss how we overcome that, that roadblock, because we want Indian country to be a government relationship with the private sector as well as other government relationships too. So with that, unless anybody has anything else for the good of the order, this hearing stands adjourned. Thank you again so much for being here for your testimony. The record will stay open for 2 additional weeks in case members have anything else that they want to ask, and we appreciate your prompt response to those questions. We're adjourned.